It's your boy, Remoy George Phillip, the first.
And I'm Samantha and Zessie.
This is MASKulinity.
The show that investigates the performance of masculinity in the world today, and you know we spell it with a hard K.
So, Samantha.
Yes, RGP1?
Ooh, I like that. Ooh, have you rethought your proposal menu?
No, I haven't. Well, for those of you who don't know, Remoy is talking about our last episode. It was on matriarchies. It's called the matriarchy episode, so it'll make it easy for you to find. And apparently in some matriarchies, women propose to men.
Yeah. Ooh, and so what would be your best proposal dish? The world needs to know.
Why don't we ask our guests that instead? We have playwright and current visiting professor at Bard College, Beto O'Byrne. Welcome, Beto.
Hola a todos. I'm so happy to be here.
Okay, Beto. Well, Samantha's avoiding, or kind of not, whatever dinner, entree, junk food meal you want in a perfect world. And yes, I may be telling your partner this, Beto. What meal, what food, what dish would you want to be proposed to with?
Oh man, that's really tough for me. I'm pretty, when it comes to food, I'm pretty basic about my feelings around it. But in general, what I really like is simple dishes that are made with very good ingredients.
Yes.
So I like just like really simple food, but like really like top shelf like food in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just to say, I have kind of an aversion to the construct of marriage for political and social reasons. So it's hard for me to answer this question of being proposed to.
Oh, this is great because me and Samantha are going to have an episode about this very soon. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Woo! And it's
about to get called out.
I mean, that's what you get for inviting me on your pod. Like,
well, we invited a professor on our pod. So pop quiz, Beto. What are we talking about on the show today?
Oh man, we're going to be talking about one of the things, something that I don't get to talk near enough about in the world. So you're going to get a lot of it.
Ooh, that's quite a tease we got there. We'll see what Beto has to say after the break.
Curious about next-gen men? We're a small part of a much larger movement to undefine masculinity for a brighter future. Our mission is clear: empower the next generation to use their curiosity, empathy, and courage to build a more equitable world. Join the Next Gen Men community as we learn and unlearn together. We're here to support boys and men to break free from limiting stereotypes. We're not just an organization, we're a catalyst for reimagining masculinity and fostering inclusivity. We're here to help open up possibilities for what men and boys can be. Explore the world of Next Gen Men at nextgenmen.ca and join the community to make a difference. Next Gen Men, shaping tomorrow's leaders one step at a time. Join us and help undefine masculinity and empower the next generation of men to lead with empathy and courage.
Welcome back. Samantha, today we're going to do something different.
Are we?
You're going to love it. I swear you'll love it. Just trust me on this one, man.
Sure, Remoy. You tell me how I'm feeling. So we're really still all about that performance, aren't we?
Well,
Got it.
Actually, I'm glad you said performing because today let's just say we have a guest host joining us, Beto O'Byrne. Welcome.
Hola. Thank you for having me.
Beto, so you're a playwright and you're currently teaching up at Bard College. Is that correct?
That is correct. I also teach at Pace University and I sometimes teach at Brooklyn College and other places as well. I live that adjunct professor life.
Nice. So what do you teach?
I teach classes in playwriting and I teach classes in the history and performance techniques of the Chicano or the Mexican American theater, history of performing arts and activism, history of the theater and performers and artists who are also people of color in the United States, things along those lines.
Okay, so this means you're going to be talking about patriarchy and the performing arts?
Oh, that's a fair guess, fair assumption, Samantha. But it's a bit of a rope-a-dope, if you will.
Wow. Wait a minute. I'm the dope here? That's what we're doing? All right.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So go ahead, Remoy. Continue.
Yeah. Okay. Well, not going to back out of that corner, but Beto, why don't you take us into the ring, if you will, for a little hint, Samantha, and reveal to Samantha what you're talking us through today.
Sure. So if you can't tell, because of the things that I teach, I'm a big old theater nerd. I'm a big old nerd in general. I'm an NOC, if you will, a nerd of color.
Ooh, all right.
Shout out to
3 NOCs in the virtual room here. Yeah, okay.
I'm into it.
shout out to Hard Knock Life. It's a great podcast. You guys should invite me to your show. I want to be on it.
Oh, nice. Oh, I love it.
So obviously when I say
NOC, proud NOC here.
So when I say nerd, it's with a lot of pride, right? It's not a pejorative to me. And I'm a nerd about a lot of things, not just
Mad
theater.
proud over here. We're all nerds over here. Hell yeah, dog.
Oh, yeah.
And, because I'm like in like huge air quotes, like an academic, I like to think about my nerdy pursuits in academic ways, meaning like what they mean about society, what they say about the human condition, things along those lines. And I've been a big fan
Gender? Nerd over gender? What up?
I've been a big and like very nerdy fan of one thing in particular, pretty much my whole life. And when Remoy and I were talking about me coming on the show, thinking about the evolution and expression of gender, especially through this construct of masculinity, the first thing that I thought about was how can we think about that through the lens of
Get ready for it?
professional wrestling?
Wow. Not at all where I thought you were going to go with that, I have to say. Yeah. It's
I'm
nice-
bringing the right energy to this episode.
I mean, evidently, yes, you are. Yes, you are.
This is like my perfect episode, Samantha, because if you didn't know, amongst the many things of the multitudes I contain, I was an 80s and 90s wrestling fanatic. Talking The Undertaker, Ultimate Warrior, Rey Mysterio Jr., the list goes on and on.
Oh, yeah, the cream of the crop.
Macho Man, baby. Of course, the Macho Man.
Oh my God. Can you please do the rest of it? I need you to do the rest of it in that voice, please.
Oh my God. If I did this whole thing as the Macho Man, it would be brutal.
In the best way, I'm sure.
I'm sure I've peaked on this mic so many times now. It's fine.
Okay, so can we maybe bring it back? 7:30 on the East Coast. I mean, on the West Coast. Woo. Freudian slip. Still trying to get to your page. So, Remoy, if you don't recall, it's not actually real wrestling. It's just,
Dare you to say it. Dare you to say
Whoa,
it.
whoa, 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 whoa.
It's like a theater, sporty.
Let's choose our words carefully here because writers in the room and words matter.
Oh.
Professional wrestling is oftentimes called fake. Professional wrestling is not fake. Anyone that thinks that should watch just any episode of what's going on right now, whether it's what we usually think of when we think of professional wrestling, which is the WWE, or any of the smaller organizations like AEW, AAA in Mexico, NJPW in Japan. Watch any of these athletes do their thing in the ring. They are performers, but they are athlete performers. It's physically demanding. It's risky. It's a taxing performing art.
Preach, dog.
Right. And there's a big difference between something being fake and something being scripted, i.e. having a predetermined outcome.
Oh.
Or even like a rehearsed performance, especially for like
Maybe something
bigger
we're doing right
events.
now. Whatever. It's fine.
All right. I mean, okay. All right. Scripted. Sure. I'll take scripted. That's cool.
I actually have a quote from a book because, again, y'all, I'm an academic, so I brought source material in here.
Well done, my guy.
I'm going to use just basically one book. So it's a recent book that came out. There's a lot of great books that have been written about the history of professional wrestling and biographies and things like that. But this one book that I'm thinking about a lot these days is called The Ringmaster by a writer named Josie Reisman. And
What up, Josie Reisman? Email me back, by the way. Thank you. Anyway, keep going.
Wow.
we tried. But this is a quote that I think really encapsulates what I'm trying to think about.
We smell what the Beto is cooking. That's a raw quote, Samantha, if you didn't know, huh?
I most certainly did know. But thank you.
Wow.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Beto.
I mean, The Rock is probably the only one I know. That one and Stone Cold Steve Austin that had the 316 everywhere.
Oh, you're about to get into some more later today, but go ahead.
So the quote that I wanted to share with you by Josie Reisman says, "This lucrative enterprise is not a legitimate competition, but it is indisputably an expression of creativity. Its practitioners have a time-worn saying, "This ain't ballet," but it's not that far from ballet. A kinetic method of storytelling, one that requires tremendous skill and physical pain to perform.
Again, yeah, and it's like so fascinating, right? Like it's like this ballet, it's this artistic expression, it's a sport, but all of it in some way, shape, or form is a performance. How incredible is that, Samantha?
I mean, it is interesting when you put it that way. The whole thing is so theatrical, right? I mean, with the zoom ins and like the pauses, and then of course the fighting. It is really like theater.
Yeah, it's entertainment and it's sport. I believe legally it is sports entertainment.
Well, I think we can use some of that like nerd knowledge and your academic lens and your performance understanding to look at wrestling as like this performance and what that says about our world and gender especially.
Yeah, I definitely think so. When you think about the performance of MASKulinity with the K, right?
Hard K.
It's all over wrestling, I think, both historically and in the modern moment in very interesting ways.
Yeah, and one of those, like, let's not forget this. I think once you think about it, it's like absurd and you can't not see it. But it's like the costumes, right? We're talking spandex, we're talking nylon, we're talking tassels. I'm going to show you guys a perfect video. Hold on 1 second.
Please tell me there's tassels in the video.
Fuck yeah, there is.
Nice. Yes.
Ready?
Because this freaking nature right here is just beginning to swell. And when I get big enough, brother, there ain't gonna be room for anybody else but me and all the warriors floating through the veins.
It's campy as hell. I love this mask. He's got like it's a man who's like all oiled up. He's super tan. He's got long tassels on his muscles, which is amazing.
Topple me with raging elephants. You can feel it, dude.
This is like the campiest shit I've ever seen. It's amazing.
Load the spaceship with the rocket fuel. Load it with the warriors.
I'd buy that as the Ultimate Warrior, you know?
I mean, I can tell you're really into this, Samantha.
Yeah, to be honest, why don't y'all wear tassels around your muscles? Huh? You know, where are your tassels?
I mean, as far as the listening audience is concerned, I'm wearing them right now.
Well played.
Well, okay, so Samantha gave some fun commentary while we were watching. Beto, what else is going on?
Well, that video, that's like prime, like 90s WWF right there. That performer's name is James Bryan Hellwig. He performed, honestly, quite poorly, I would add, as the Ultimate Warrior was his character's name.
Calm down.
He was notoriously bad as a performer, but he was a huge character, right? And a big name of his time, right? He was really known for those kind of amped up promos that you just observed, Samantha. They were also like largely, if you can listen to it, it makes very little sense. Like what he's saying.
Zero sense.
But he's just big. He's energetic. He's throwing it at you. You know, he's a great example of the kind of late 80s, early 90s era of the WWF. You know, he's like 90% bodybuilder, like 10% wrestler. It's all about like image, right? It was about his look. It was about his energy. It was about pumping up the kids, getting them excited, right? And you can just like in that video, you can just like feel the mask all over it, right? There's like aggression, there's competitiveness, there's like need to assert dominance, the like display of physical strength is validity, right? These are all things that I associate with the mask, right? Like in that idea, just like saturating, particularly that era. But I think, you know, as this very broad popular form continues, it's a very much a common thread that you see like throughout the history of professional wrestling.
Well, I mean, but we also can't not see in this video, like we don't see it as much, but in wrestling and in this video and elsewhere, like scantily clad, overly tanned, egregiously muscled upon like types of bodies here, mostly men, right?
Yeah, you know, it's actually interesting because I recall watching this and being like, this is so over the top. My brother used to watch it. And I was always like, why are they wearing so little clothes? You know, and they're like wrestling, oil all over them. You know, it's like, I don't know that much about wrestling the way that you guys do, whatever. But I remember as a kid watching it and being like, there's something interesting going on here. I don't know if it's masculinity. I don't know what it is, but.
Well, the lack of clothing has some very functional elements too, right? These are athletes that are moving around in the ring. So like if they have a lot of stuff going on that can get caught on things, it can get in the way, things along those lines. But also just in terms of general performance, right? If I am performing as a character that's big and strong and is going to no one can stop me and no one can beat me up, well, then you want to see my muscles, right? Like you want to see my physical presence in the ring, right? And there's also a layer of masculinity that's there too, right? If you might think of a real world equivalent that comes to mind immediately for me right now is like when people talk about like bare knuckle boxing, right? Like I'm such a man. I can take this without I don't need armor. I don't need protection. I can just go in the ring, with my trunks on that look like a pair of underwears, right? And just go for it, So there is that performance of it that's on top of that too, right?
There's so much of that, and it's layers of things, whether it's saying it explicitly or not, it's showing the audience something and it's saying something along this larger narrative. And this is the ultimate warrior of the 80s and 90s, but again, using your academic hat, Beto, how do we get here? I've heard you talk about the relationship to the carnival and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a long and kind of fascinating history here, that would take, a long time to really unpack, but I think that we can get some kind of quick elements. But before we do that, I just want to be clear, when it comes to this history, when it comes to this stuff, I'm an amateur wrestling historian at best, right? And a kind of cultural critic. So, don't at me, all you smarks out there listening. And if you know what that term means, I'm talking directly to you, right? If you want to do a deep dive on this stuff beyond what we talk about today, there's people like Dave Meltzer or Jim Cornette, if you can stomach listening to him, things like that.
Won't add them to our show notes. Sure. We will, we won't. I get it.
But getting back to our conversation around kind of early history and things like that, I'll just give you the TLDR version of what we're doing, or I'll do my best to get the TLDR version of this thing out here.
Mr.
Right?
NOC Smark, let's go.
We'll start with the early 20th century of carnival performance, right? Although we could certainly go before that, but let's just start with that so we have a moment that we can. And we can start with the kind of presentations of what we would call then, and still a little bit today, what we call is catch wrestling. Catch wrestling was performed in carnivals and fairs throughout the United States. If you've ever watched MMA or UFC, there's oftentimes a moment where the fighters are just kind of rolling around on the floor in this kind of odd homoerotic dance. And they kind of eventually just kind of lie there, holding each other, You can kind of see this as a kind of catch wrestling, right? And you can also kind of imagine that that kind of performance in a carnival atmosphere can be a little hard to get people to pay attention to, right? People wandering around. This is just one thing of many things that you can see, right?
It's this. I just want to this homoeroticism. It's there, and we're not qualifying it as good or bad, or that's what I'm saying. But it's just there so much in these sports.
Yeah,
and it's just fascinating.
Yeah,
and nobody in that aspect of it is entertained by so many men. A lot of them, I presume, would identify as straight and cis and all these things, and it's just fascinating. Yeah. It's paradox.
Yeah. You can't unsee it. It's kind of like the NFL, right? Once you start looking at it, you can't unsee it.
Yes. Yeah. I particularly love the teammate slap on the bottom. I feel those kinds of things, just those all these other kind of weirdly affectionate expressions that happen in these sports moments between men that maybe off the field might be considered a little oh, what are you doing? Even though it could be fine if people just let people live. And I feel wrestling is full of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, these are oiled up bodies rolling around, rubbing against each other. There's sweat.
And shiny underwear. Yeah.
There's shiny underwear. There's throwing each other against ropes. There's holds. You start looking at it, you can, I mean, it's interesting to think about, right? And I am not the person to go into the deep dive of this, but there's a lot of really fascinating, psychological analysis of the relationship that we have both, socially as well as biologically, between sex and violence. Like these things are intertwined in our brains chemically, some people believe, right? Like, and I think that's pretty established, right? Like, so like, it's interesting to kind of see when we see performances of these things, hard not to see it, right? Because there is a link.
Yeah, I gotta say, when you say throw each other against ropes, that really is like, that could be a couple scenarios, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I never thought about it like that.
And you can think about it as a kind of natural evolution. As we were talking about, in the days of the carnival, right, when they were attempting to get people paying attention, this kind of wrestling wasn't really necessarily grabbing it, but they started to realize if they could kind of like put together moments and kind of have these moments that they knew were coming, they could create these kind of spectacles that could get the audiences hooked on what's going on, right? And that's kind of how professional wrestling came to become, because it kind of came out of that moment of like saying like, oh, well, we need to do things to grab people's attention, right? It's not just about like a boxing match. It needs to be bigger than that. We're trying to grab people,
It needs to be theatrical. It needs to be entertaining. Yeah.
And out of that, we get professional wrestling, and we now get to watch amazing performers do things like moonsaults and suplexes and frog splashes, these like big
Sweet
events.
chin music,
Sweet
Stone
chin
Cold
music.
Stunner, the DDT.
Right.
Y'all got all the terms. Wow.
Yeah. And when you think about that as the evolution of that, you can think about that alongside these ideas of predetermining events as being also necessary to like create characters, right? Create characters that help establish these things, show what's going on, right? And back in the day, professional wrestlers like practically lived as their characters. Like anytime they were in the public, they will present themselves as the character they were playing.
Yeah, I mean, The Rock has stopped like putting his eyebrow up anytime that he's around. So, I'm glad for him that he's finally moved on to a different piece of life. But I'm wondering, what does that look like for some other people? I'm really only familiar with The Rock, honestly.
Yeah. He'll bring that eyebrow and it gets a big reaction every time he does.
Oh, will he still?
He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and then this is like all through like The Rock and stuff. It's like transitioning into that era that's like when I stopped watching. It's kind of this era that Beto's talking about called the Attitude. I'm just going to show you a video, Samantha, like a scene, a theatrical moment from this era.
Okay, all right.
Say nothing. Sit here and tell me to work within the system. You ain't the one sitting on your ass in the house like I am.
Yeah, so Stone Cold Steve Austin is in Vince McMahon's face. And he's pointing outside, so I don't know if he's telling him to leave or if he's like, let's bring this guy on so I can fight him or something.
And I also appreciate the fact that, hell, you can kiss my ass.
Whoa, he knocked out Vince McMahon. What the hell? He's being pulled away. Oh, Lord. And then now Vince McMahon is just looking at the sky, wondering what his life is about.
Put him in jail right now.
And the crowd is going wild. Somebody's got his hand on his head like, yo, what the hell just happened? Oh, my God. Stone Cold Steve Austin, I believe now is being arrested. I see his hands are behind his back.
The handcuffs on him. Austin is going directly to jail.
It's that was good.
So yeah, for those people who didn't know, in the ring of Stone Cold Steve Austin, I love me some Stone Cold Steve and his Stone Cold Stunner. Huh? Mm-hmm. Austin 316, we said earlier.
I don't actually know what that's.
And the one who gets assaulted with the Stone Cold Stunner, I don't know if you know, Samantha, that was Vince McMahon. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah, I heard about him because he like runs the thing, right? He always would like come in the ring with like a suit on. Everybody else was like not clad. It was weird, but yeah.
Well, yeah, when it comes to kind of the modern industry of professional wrestling, really starting with the 80s, it's really hard. Vince McMahon pretty much has everything to do with everything. He's really is someone who dominates the industry in a lot of ways.
Yeah, he's like kind of the evil genius who changed everything and made it like this global industry, especially the WWE or WWF. He begged, borrowed, and stole to make it what it is today. And unfortunately, but not surprisingly so, he's been exposed for some variable, horrible, evil things, sex trafficking to name one of them. But now he's been removed from the company, kind of.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah. He was basically forced out. The book that I mentioned earlier, was called The Ringmaster, and it is an unauthorized biography of Vince McMahon. And I think it's a really, really good one that Josie Reisman has put together. And anyone that is interested in this figure who I don't think everyone kind of realizes how large Vince McMahon looms in popular culture, because he, for a very long time, like many mob bosses, it was very effective at not being like what he was doing was not visible, right? Even when he was presenting himself as a character in his own show, right? What was going on the backside, and his ability to basically create a monopoly out of an industry and to continue that monopoly for decades. And just to say, there's a long history in professional wrestling of these colorful, often criminal, often despicable characters, right? But this is not dissimilar to the larger cultural and political history of the United States, right? One of our major modern political figures is literally in a courtroom about a couple of miles from where I'm sitting right now.
A WWE entertainer as well.
Yeah,
So,
in the Hall of Fame, by the way.
He's in the Hall of Fame for WWE? Oh, my God.
That is correct. Yeah.
Oh.
And there are a few that are more colorful and more criminal and frankly more despicable than Vince McMahon, although there's plenty that could give him a run for his money, right?
Wow.
But we'd need 12 episodes just to get through all that.
12 episode, we need 24, 36. I hear episode series. I hear podcast, documentary series. I'm calling ESPN right now.
All
Bill
right,
Simmons?
all right,
Who
all
wants
right.
it? Give me the
Okay.
check. Write me the check.
All right,
No?
Remoy. Thanks. I mean, yep. Mm-hmm.
But as I mentioned too, like wrestling, it's a barometer for me of like larger popular culture. And I think that's why I'm so fascinated by it, right? We can look at what they're creating, what they're doing in the ring, the storytelling that they're doing is oftentimes like connecting to things that are happening in the world and to the way that I think of the popular culture of US is kind of like living in both, I don't even think about it in like positive and negative. I think about it as an indicator of what's going on, right?
Can you say more about that? What do you mean?
Sure. And I'm going to bring my source back into here. I'm going to bring another quote in from Josie Reisman's book, Ringmaster. And I think that this really, when I read this, I was like, wow, you really nailed a lot of what I'm thinking about. There is no art form more intrinsically American in its casual violence, its bombastic braggadocio, its virulent jingoism, its populist defiance of respectability, and its intermittently awe-inspiring beauty than professional wrestling. And I think that really just grabs so many elements. And I mean, the clip that you just shared of Stone Cold, such a great example of so many of those things, particularly of that era, right? Like the idea of like standing against your boss, who like, I remember, and then one time I heard someone say, yeah, in terms of like this character that Steve Austin plays, like who hasn't won a hauled off and smacked their boss at one point or another, right? He does it for you in the ring.
I mean, I guess that's pretty, what is it, cathartic? Yeah, to see that.
Yeah.
I mean, just imagine yourself doing that at work.
Yeah. And just to say too, and like when I think about these things and I think about like this in popular culture at large, and professional wrestling is just one element of this, right? That like all these isms that we live with, right? Whether it's racism, sexism, misogyny, all these things can be found both in the storytelling and in the industry of professional wrestling because they exist in society. The same way that all these things exist in the film industry, in the TV industry, in the music, in other professional sports, all the things, right? They show up, right? So it's interesting, right? But I think to kind of contain our conversation as much as possible, today I just kind of want to focus on like the performance that we see in the ring and kind of do our best to kind of think about like how these things are being presented and how gender and masculinity show up inside that.
It's like such a great conversation that we're having around like masculinity and wrestling, because it's really kind of nice to see the campiness of like hyper masculinity being kind of espoused for all of these folks. And I think, as we talked about earlier, mostly an audience of men to really enjoy, right? To maybe live vicariously through these characters, and not necessarily just the fighting, but maybe also the closeness to other men. You know, like what would it be like to just, I don't know, run around like oiled up and like fight with your friends, you know, like, yeah, I don't know.
Well, one of the things that I think it's important to think about, and especially because of the two clips that Remoy chose, you know, one is from the like, I don't know exactly when that Ultimate Warrior promo happened, but I'm going to guess it was early 90s, somewhere probably between 93, 94. And then the clip that you just showed was like turn of the century at some point, right? That Attitude Era, Stone Cold, when Stone Cold got arrested. I don't remember exactly the date of that either. But those are, you know, that's a couple decades ago, right? What's happening now, I think might actually surprise you. In terms of like where we are in terms of presentation of gender in professional wrestling.
Really? Will it? I don't know. I mean, I'm into it. I'm into it.
Skepticism. Well, I think I know where Beto's going with this. So let's do this. Samantha, you're hesitant, but if I were to tell you there's a wrestler who goes by the name, get ready for it, The Man.
Like just The
What do you think
Man?
that wrestler looks like?
Yeah, they're just known as The Man.
Well, The Man, right? Like, The Man is wearing a suit, right? He's coming to collect your taxes. He's going to whoop your ass if you didn't pay. He's like shoving papers in your face, probably. He probably has a briefcase, you know? And oh my God, what if he had a briefcase and then he opened it and there was just like an array of like different colored panties for him to throw on, tassels, all kinds of shit. His mask, you know?
Samantha's
oil,
on one right now.
obviously.
Okay, well, I'm going to show another video of the man walking out onto stage, if you will. Describe to the audience what you're seeing. Ready?
Okay. So that says The Man in between X and L. So I'm expecting like a huge dude. And we see, we see a lady with this beautiful red hair with papers in her dress. She's wearing a bodice with like a corset. She has fur on. I mean, this seems like this would be more like, I don't know.
That performer is their name is Rebecca Quinn. They go by Becky Lynch. They're originally from Ireland. And their nickname is The Man. Like that is a nickname that they've kind of earned over the years. It actually kind of stemmed from a feud that Becky Lynch had with another performer named Charlotte Flair, who's the daughter of a very, very, very famous wrestler named the Nature Boy Ric Flair. If you've ever heard someone go, woo, that's an homage to The Man. Because he would oftentimes say, to be the man, you have to beat the man. And so when Becky Lynch started this feud with his daughter, she was like, well, I'm the man now and you got to beat me. Right. And it kind of stuck over the time and kind of became this persona of her. And it just really took off. You know, the audience is like really, they love her. They tried to do her to play her as a bad person, you know, as what we would call a heel in wrestling terminology. And it just kind of didn't work because the audience just wants to be.
They love her too much.
Want to support her so much, right? Like it was a really unsuccessful, I believe, like heel run. She couldn't get them to dislike her.
But like, this hasn't always been the case, right? Like, we didn't have Becky Lynch's for the last 40 years. We didn't have The Man for the last 40 years, right?
In terms of women performers, you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we could spend a long time kind of like talking about the rise of women identifying performers in professional wrestling, but I can do my best here to kind of give us another kind of TLDR history of this. which historically speaking, for the longest time, women's matches were largely considered what they would call gimmick matches, right? They're more spectacle than they are technical. They were rarely taken as seriously as male performers, right?
So like, well, what does that look like? Like, are they not getting their scores or something? Are they? Yeah. Like what's?
So, I think an example that I always think about is that there are kind of like rumors and stories of promoters, because these are traveling shows, right? They travel around the country. They would like go into town. They would go to local modeling agencies and request like 2 underwear models. So they would like fight in the ring, right? This is like kind of the original early days, right? That you would see kind of that. So they wouldn't be actual professionals. And that's not to say that there weren't, right? But the kind of, more often than not that was the kind of way. That was more, those other performers were more the exception that kind of proved the rules. And it's particular, like in the 70s and the 80s, right? And then we get into the 80s and the 90s, which was attempting to be a more wholesome thing. If there was a woman performer on the screen, they're often what we would call a valet, a kind of entourage character that was there designed to support the male performance.
Oh my God, like a literal cheerleader in the ring? Get the fuck out of here. Do they know that women have anger? Women want to fight. Women definitely want to fight.
Well, we're heading towards that, right? Remember again, this is like 80s and 90s era, right? Like it was that, like the women couldn't really be seen as fighting. They couldn't be seen, and that was being seen, right, as not feminine enough, right? Like that idea. Again, we're looking at like popular culture, right? Like in a larger construct, right?
Yeah.
This started to change in the time that we have referenced in the Attitude Era, right? As it continued. Women performers and characters started to assert themselves in the ring more, started to insert that they also have skills that they can put on display more, right? And at that point, they started to receive training that was comparable, right? There are 2 names at this point that people might know. One of the kind of internally in kind of like the wrestling world, the one that kind of paved the way more was a performer who went by the name Lita. But externally, I think people might be more familiar for both kind of good and complicated reasons with a performer named China, who really—
Rest in power, China. Rest in power. That was a king. That was a legend.
And China would wrestle men, and that was kind of the big thing that she was. Yeah.
Wow.
And, these performers really paved the way for other really amazing, like women who began to kind of push this idea. People like Trish Stratus, Mickie James, Beth Phoenix, but it's still kind of really being defined in this kind of traditional femininity, right? And because this is a kind of overtly masculine with a hard K world, this femininity is also very sexualized, right? And this is still like going on, right? As you move forward, you can really even think about as something that's helpful to me is like the women's division was oftentimes called the divas division. So they were like divas in the ring, right? They even had the like divas belt, which at one point was kind of modeled after a butterfly.
Wow.
If the imagery wasn't enough, right? Like it was like to let you know that, right?
Wow.
And you can go back and look, and again, there's exceptions to the rule, but the rule really, you can think about everything as like very stock in this construct, right? These are like stereotypical constructs of beauty. You're talking like tall, thin, blonde, overwhelmingly white, right? Like this kind of idea and understanding of things. Yeah, that this is kind of in this era of time, right?
I mean, everything you're saying about how it completely reflects society, spot on here, right? Including the fact that even if women are being let in, they have like this very specific role that they need to play. They still need to. I mean, we talked about this with Kirsten Cron Mills in terms of like women having to wear hats, right? Here they've got like a little butterfly belt. I mean, it's wild. Which is such a stark contrast to like the way that men are allowed to like play out this homoeroticism, for the gaze of other men, whereas women still have to fit this particular like male gaze, even as they are, moving into this new era. So really interesting. Yeah.
And I would say that like in terms of like masculine performance, we see a lot of the kind of same kind of stereotypical elements here, like, in terms of like what bodies are supposed to look like, right? What a wrestler is supposed to look like, the thinness, the sculptedness, right? If people aren't that, it's for a very specific reason, or they've managed to kind of overcome that. But you don't see that kind of overcoming happening in the women's division very much, if at all, in this era. But that was like then, right? Like, even though we're talking about, maybe like a decade or so ago, and less. In the kind of modern moment, in the clip that we just saw, there was literally a moment that was called the Women's Revolution. And this was like a moment when a whole host of women from a very diverse set of presentations started to emerge,
So this is more than just Becky Lynch.
Absolutely. Just to kind of give you one more, like, where we are in the world here. And what we're kind of seeing with like women performers in WWE. Remoy, I'd like for you to share one more video with Samantha.
You got it. Hold on. Samantha, can you describe what you're saying?
Yeah, spotlight that's like kind of, the cosmos. We've got some sky, some stars. It's like tall, godly figure walks through. Ooh, it's a silhouette, so I'm presuming it's a woman. Yeah, you could see, ooh, she's flexing. Ooh, nails. Yes. Yeah, she's very muscular. It's just a silhouette. Oh my God. Oh, she is everything. She's wearing this incredible, like, red suit. Oh, she's got like the Grace Jones shades with a beautiful blonde bob. She is fly as hell. OMG, I want to be her. Who is that? Jade Cargill. Oh my God, with the knee-high boots.
Yeah.
All red, baby.
Herself a physique that would make Michelangelo himself jealous. A work of art.
Wow. Thank you.
She's a great example of, I think, where WWE is in this conversation at this moment. She's kind of the most recent addition to the WWE like list of superstars. Her name is Jade Cargill. She's getting a huge push right now as something that's going to be kind of one of the next big things. As it often goes in WWE, we'll have to see what happens. But if her trajectory continues, I can't imagine her being anything but a huge superstar as she moves forward. So it's neat to see that, right? And it's neat to see, again, like, as, someone who's like very clearly a person of color, a woman, like all these things that previously would never get a push in the WWE in previous decades is now like being primed to be one of the elite superstars.
Samantha, come on. You gotta admit you're impressed, huh?
You know what? You got me. All right. I'm not going to sit here and talk shit. You got me. I want to be friends with Jade Cargill. I don't know what she's into. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And yeah, let's keep it going, actually. In our next segment. Can I stay? I want to stay.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's both of us stay. 5 questions with Beto. Let's go.
You got it. Okay, so that's coming up right after the break.
I actually found out later by a friend that Matthew tried to kill himself after that.
What does it look like to go from a perpetrator of violence to an undaunted ally for those who are vulnerable?
So, that made me feel really guilty, and I couldn't eat anything, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't do anything. I thought I deserved what he got. That's when I started talking to you.
This is the story of Lewis, a 12-year-old who went through a remarkable transformation to become the young man he is today. It's also one of the most powerful things I've ever recorded as part of Breaking the Boy Code, a podcast centered on the inner lives of boys and what it looks like for parents and educators to raise the next generation of men. Created in collaboration with Next Gen Men Podcast Network, listen to Breaking the Boy Code podcast wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back. So, Samantha.
Yes, Remoy?
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Let me go ahead and get ahead of you on this. You are wrong.
Wow. Okay. Funny.
I kid. I joke. Hee hee.
All right. Anyway, so usually I'd be asking Beto 5 questions here, but since like Beto is kind of our host, should he be asking us questions?
Ooh, maybe. But let's just save that last part of this segment for that. At the end of this, Beto, you get to ask us a question that one of us will answer.
we're just going to say you're going to ask Samantha a question and Samantha will answer, okay?
Okay.
Wow. Okay. Am I witnessing an involved Remoy?
Let me quote you on this. Let's not get ahead of this.
Wow. Touche. Okay, so should I go first or should you go first?
Okay, so we got 5 questions. I'll take this first one. I've been thinking on this for a second. What do I want to ask? We got 5 questions. Only 5 between both of us.
Oh, we don't get 5 each? Okay, fine.
No.
Okay.
You're gonna make me answer 10 questions?
I know, my bad, my fault. Actually, after I said it, I was like, you know what, Samantha? Like, yeah.
Let's do this. Beto, we've talked a little bit offline, but I want to know more, maybe in like TLDR version, maybe, but like you've talked about how wrestling has a longer history even before like the carnival time and like coming through your like expertise on Chicano theater. Like, what is the history outside of like the colonized West or America or even before American carnivals, like the luchador side of things? I'm a little bit curious about that.
Yeah. And, just kind of like my other pursuits and interests in studies, I really focus on the U.S. traditions. But I have a little bit of an understanding of like, for example, what happens in Mexico. There's a long history of professional wrestling in Mexico. They're called luchadores and then it's also known as lucha libre or like free wrestling. That, has been rumored to have a kind of pre-Columbian root, that there is, possibly like connections to, pre-colonized Mexica history that like might be presented into this. You can kind of see it as a tradition of that. And there's also like very specific kind of cultural traditions. Like, so for example, in Mexican wrestling history, you will see a lot of performers in masks, and more often than not, if you see a performer that is wearing a mask in the ring, they likely have some connection to luchador history and like luchador performance. They probably wrestled in Mexico at some point. In the same way that a lot of performers you'll see in the ring, they'll have Japanese script somewhere on their outfits, on their uniforms. And that's usually an indicator that they went and spent some time in Japan and they have like a fan base and a history that connects them to like that history as well.
Amazing.
Yeah, interesting.
Samantha, your turn.
Yeah, so my question is, I'm really interested in this like notion of like homoeroticism, but specifically the fact that men are watching this go down, right? So I wanted to ask you what you think it does for, men watching this, to be watching these kind of over the top performances between like scantily clad wrestlers running at each other, throwing each other against ropes, wrestling with each other. Like, why is this good for them?
I think that the first and maybe most complicated answer is in the name of the industry itself, like the WWE. It's worldwide, wrestling entertainment. I think they're essentially looking for, and just to say, there's a really, and at least in the modern era now specifically, there's a very strong, women viewership now, but specifically for like male dating folks, maybe there's elements of being able to live vicariously, right? Like inside this entertainment, of being able to see yourself expressing that kind of like masculinity. I mean, I know I look at some of these guys and I am not somebody that has, I don't know. I mean, for the listening audience, I 100% have a wrestling body. I don't know if y'all don't know that. 100%.
We all do. Yeah,
we all do. I know. So,
8-pack.
I have an 18-pack.
8-pack
18-pack, yeah.
If you
I look
can't
just
see them.
like Jade Cargill. I look just like her. I was lying earlier. I am her.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think about. I think a lot about too that there's a lot of like brotherhood in wrestling stories too, right? This idea of like we're companions, like that we're in something together, even if we're kind of like, there's a lot of like going it alone, but there's a lot of just like, elements of that, right? Elements of like connection that I think are formed in that,
Yeah.
So there could very easily be an element of that as well, right?
This isn't another question. I know it's your turn, Remoy, but I want to put a caveat on my question. I know I always do this. So I said homoeroticism, which I don't know if that's really what I meant, even though you perfectly answered my question because you must be telepathic or something. Because I think what I was trying to drive at was that there's a certain closeness that men aren't allowed to have in real life that I think, in wrestling, you're able to espouse, and you don't necessarily have to quantify it with I'm bi or pan or straight or whatever. You just get to have fun and be close to the people around you in this sort of brotherhood or just connectedness or whatever. So I love that. And I love the campiness, the over the top of it, specifically because you really get to go all out with it, right?
Yeah.
And so I love that the people have it. I love that the people have it. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about, in U.S. popular culture, the kind of wrestling that became really popular really kind of stems out of the Southern wrestling traditions. So you can think about Southern men have a certain repressed quality to them speaking in a very broad way, right? You express manness as a kind of stoicness, as a kind of not expressing emotion, things like that. So maybe there is an element of that is there. I don't know, disagree with what you think, but my experience as a man growing up in Texas was that the strong, silent construct, right?
Samantha's going to make a joke about me. I can tell it's going to about me or her.
I mean, obviously. I was obviously going to go to to the other TX man here, the other Tejas man, if you will, from the good old Yellowtown, Amarillo, and ask you, does this track?
Well, I'm just going to ask my third question to Beto, which is related.
The audience wants to know. The listeners want to know.
What do you think? When did you start watching wrestling, Beto? And it's multiple questions back. When did you start watching wrestling, and what effects do you think it had? Or maybe when did you learn that it was more scripted, and what effect did that have on you?
Yeah. So I think, okay, so here's what I think it is. I started watching wrestling probably when I was somewhere around 8 or 9 years old. I used to watch it after coming home from mass. Actually, we would go to church, right? And then after church, we would go to my grandparents' house, on Sunday mornings, and I would sit on the floor and my grandfather would be in his chair, and we would watch wrestling, on Sunday mornings. And so that's when I first started watching it. And that's when I first kind of really loved it. And I loved it also because it was a bonding experience between me and my grandfather, right? Who was one of these very silent people, right? Very silent, men, And I remember he would the funniest thing about him is he hated all the promo stuff. So he would just mute it, and he would just wait for them to get done talking so we could just watch the wrestling. I always wanted to watch the promos because I thought it was fun, to watch them do their thing. But if I remember correctly, there was a moment where I think it was, if you remember, a character named Earthquake.
Oh, I do not remember Earthquake.
And there was a guy named Earthquake who was a huge, huge guy. And he had this feud with good old Hulk Hogan. And at one point, he kept sitting on Hulk Hogan, and they were oh, he's killing him, right? And then Hulk Hogan eventually had to be taken out of the ring on a stretcher or something like that.
Whoa.
And I remember being so upset by it and being and telling mom, he's they killed him, and I was really sad about it. And my mom explained to me that it wasn't real at that point. And I don't know how well that set in at that point, but I do remember that happening.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask one more question, and then Samantha, you can have the last one?
No. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, then, can you talk about some of the reasons of why these performances are so over the top? Especially this is a traveling show. This is, again, going to the carnival. There's all these interesting elements. If we don't think about it, we may not notice it, but there's some reasons for why these are over the top, maybe, right?
Sure. And I think that those reasons are ones that you can think about, from the concept of theater and performance, right? We can start with think about maybe in a simplistic way or an easily accessible way, the use of masks in the ring, right? We said that, the luchador tradition has a use of masks in the ring. One of the most well-known theater eras of all time was the Greek theater of the BC era. This is where we got some of the main names of classical theater, right? Aristophanes, Sophocles.
Ooh, my guy. Ooh, all right.
Aristotle, right? Aristotle was a critic of the theater, right? So when they were performing these big auditoriums, these outdoor venues. They would use masks so that people who were sitting all the way in the seats in the very far back of the theater or back of the auditorium could see the expression, the face, right? They could see what was going on. It was for a visual need to do that, right? So, it had a very functional reason, right? Masks in professional wrestling, I believe, are the same thing, right? They give people sitting all the way in the back a way to see character without having to see the, expressions that are happening on the face, right? It's something I talk to my playwriting students about when they'll say something they'll write a line of action in their play that says he gives this person a sidelong glance. And I'm like, how's the person in the 20th row going to see that sidelong glance? It's got to be bigger than that. You have to think about the venue that you are in, right? So you can expand that out to other things, right? The bigness of it is because they're performing to 14,000 people, right? I think the highest populated WrestleMania was around 100,000 people. How do you perform for 100,000 people? Those shows are big, giant spectacles, right? You got to be able to see it from all the way to the edge.
Well, I think it's just I think that's one thing that's so fascinating because we see this as we keep saying campiness and this over the topness, but even for better or worse, some of these over the top pronouncements of gender and not even just words said, but the physicality of it has to be so big to transmit to a huge audience.
Yeah.
It's there because it needs to be there, but it could have a negative effect down the road.
Yeah. No, I think that it's a really good point because, and when you think about it from a storytelling and a character point of view, think about the fact that when the character walks out of the ring, they've got, the time from when they walk out of the ring to when they get into the ring and they start fighting to really set up who they are, where they are, what they're doing, how they feel about this other person, their persona. So they're doing things quickly to get the audience to understand that, right? And to do that, a lot of times it's not subtle, right? And that can have ramifications, right? And that can have things that you have to think about. And, before people really started thinking about these things, when we think about things overt, maybe kind of stereotypical expressions of sexuality, stereotypical expressions of gender, definitely stereotypical expressions of race were things that were really complicated back in the earliest days because they were putting things on display to get it quickly. And oftentimes that can get really dicey because you're dealing with kind of a thin line between archetyping and stereotyping, right? To kind of grab character quickly, right? An example of that you might be able to think about is there is a character trope in wrestling, historically, and it's known as I mentioned, there's the heel, which is oftentimes the bad person. There's a long history of this trope called the foreign heel.
Oh.
And the foreign heel is a person from usually another country coming in. I wrote in my notes, it's usually a person that, hates America, right? And it immediately gets the crowd to boo them. There's a very famous incident in the 90s during the first Iraq war where the big foreign heel faction were Iraqis, right? And they would come out as Middle Easterners. And you would see it because, they would have the dress, right? Immediately, right? I think they would also carry the Iraqi flag, right? And so it was immediately the crowd hates them.
They're hugely pronouncing this character, right? They have to.
Right.
And but it has this ramification. It's fascinating.
Right. And then now of course we look back and be that's very complicated, right?
Yes.
And there's multiple times where you see that you're that's not good, that that was a moment in its time that should never happen again.
It's all fascinating. Samantha, last question to you.
Yeah. My last question is around, like, I've really enjoyed hearing you talk about the different monikers that come up in wrestling, like the heel. So I'm curious about how, like, if you could talk a little bit about how this language kind of impacts the way that we think about gender within wrestling. And then maybe even beyond that.
I think we're dealing with maybe like two things, which is like the internal workings of the work and the external presentation. Right. And that the internal language is being used to create that external thing. Right. You could maybe think about it in the terms of, you know, especially when we're talking about like the performance of it and the way that it's done, just like any like kind of like coded language like this, it is oftentimes designed to exclude people. Right. From knowing things, right? And for the longest time, this was a boys' club, right? This is a world that is largely men. So you can think about it as like excluding, you know, women from it, you know? There was an incident I was reading about the other day about a wrestler in the like early 80s who wrestled in this event that was like a kind of like, it's like free for all kind of event. And the winner got like $5,000. And then after the event was over, this wrestler's wife came up to them and was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you won $5,000. And the wrestler's like, "Yeah, I totally won $5,000 tonight." Cause she doesn't know, right? The internal side of it. Like his own wife doesn't know the coding of this thing. Right. So thinking about the way that it might be being used to keep, you know, and probably was used in ways to keep like women from having a lot of possibility and authority over the course of time. Right. There weren't a lot of women like promoters and people in control for a really, really long time. And still to this day, I think that's relatively true. So there might be a kind of component of that, right, that you can think about.
Well, now's your turn, Beto. You get to ask Samantha why she loves me so much, why I'm the best, why she appreciates my stoicism and my silence. You can ask her whatever you want.
Again, the podcast. It's mostly about podcasts, but yeah.
Beto, take it away.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask y'all a question that I think relates to me in a very kind of broad way. I didn't mean to do that. As a theater person.
I love it.
I hate it when I say Broadway in ways.
It's perfect.
That's making it. I'm not cutting that out.
But I think about it in terms of like how both men and women, but I think about it a lot more in terms of like, I feel like particularly like cishet men have this kind of conundrum. And I'm curious how y'all deal with it, because I stopped watching the NFL and kind of football in general a couple of years ago because I could personally no longer reconcile the complicated nature of the industry of the NFL, of what it is willing to allow, you know, like in terms of like its misogyny, in terms of, you know, its behavior of its players, in terms of the way its owners act in certain situations, i.e. the team in Washington, you know, like things along that. I could just no longer reconcile that with being a fan of what I watched on the field. I sometimes watch wrestling and have the same reaction. And I'm curious how you, as human beings, reconcile how you love and are a fan of complicated things.
I mean, for me, so where, you know, you have had this experience with sports, I have had this experience with music. I'm a huge music fan. I'm a big hip hop fan. And, you know, I'm a woman. So like it started to become harder and harder to listen to misogynistic lyrics, especially when you know what's happening behind the scenes, right? So had to give up R. Kelly, which was one of the first people that we talked about on this podcast. Stopped listening to Chris Brown for the most part. Now we've got Diddy. It's like, what am I going to do? Am I going to stop listening to like all the Mary J. Blige hits that he produced? You know, like all of these things. So it's hard because on one level, I can't separate the music from the art if the artist is not separating himself from the art, from his own art, you know. And I'm saying his because it's mostly, you know, men and well, usually men, people who identify as men. But I also stopped being mad. So like, I was tired of being infuriated all the time. So I feel like on one level, I'll sometimes let things go, but there are certain artists that I simply don't listen to anymore. And I also stopped watching the NFL when they stopped letting Cat play. Not that I was watching a whole lot before it, but when they stopped that, I was like, no, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think like you do have a theater company that does really incredible non-capitalistic oriented driven work, challenging those systems and others. I'm wondering, is there anything you want our audience to be aware of or get their eyes or ears ready for, or where they can find more of this work maybe?
Oh, sure. So I run a performance collective called Radical Evolution. We're based here in Brooklyn, New York. We got a lot of exciting stuff coming up, you know, because we're a theater company, we do live events. So if you are someone who comes to or is in and around the greater New York City area, feel free to give us a follow on Instagram to see what we're up to. If you want to see or hear something that is, you know, not necessarily live, but is one of the things we created. We have an audio drama adaptation of one of our shows that is available on Spotify called Little Known Legends. It is the story of the St. Patrick's Battalion, which was a group of Irish immigrants during the 1830s who come to the United States, are immediately conscripted into the United States military to fight for the U.S. during the Mexican-U.S. War, get down to the border, realize that they're on the wrong side, and defect en masse to fight for Mexico through the duration of the war. It's a really amazing kind of legend and history, and we have a heck of a lot of fun making it with our friends from a theater company called El Teatro Campesino. And so that's available on Spotify. And in hopefully just a few short months, our next podcast, which our dear friend Remoy is helping build, will be out as well.
Generous with the few months. Yeah, as we get closer to that, we'll talk more about that. But we'll share some of this stuff, all of this stuff in our show notes and on the socials, and we'll give Beto all the flowers and Merope and Radical Evolution, all the flowers they deserve. So everybody get on the lookout for that.
Yeah. And if you are someone that is interested in the intersection between kind of like gaming, video gaming culture, and things like society, I sometimes guest host on a podcast called Gamers with Jobs, where I talk about a lot of the same things. It's more of a kind of gaming podcast review in general, but they tend to have me on when I talk about the intersection of things like gaming and society, or like gaming and racialization, or things along those lines. I just did an episode about a wrestling video game not too long ago, which was fun.
NOC, baby. Beto is an NOC.
There you go.
Samantha, I gotta know, knowing everything you know now, what would your wrestling name be?
You know what? I had exactly 2 seconds to think about this, and my wrestling name would probably be something like She-Devil, you know?
Oh, that's like very Marvel of you. I thought it would be something like, you know, the one who makes pasta. Huh?
Yo,
the one who makes supposedly amazing pasta.
Oh my God, you imagine ravioli smasher?
A chef's hat.
Please don't play with me. Don't play with me. Ravioli smasher, gnocchi.
Ooh, that's not bad. We're getting somewhere. This is called iteration, folks.
This is fun. This is fun. And knowing what you know, Remoy, now, what would your wrestling outfit look like?
I mean, come on. It's not hard to guess. Like 20-something Remoy would have a full head of hair, skinny and pretty, like a jawline that cuts like a knife.
Wow.
Ooh.
Wow.
Shout out to you, brown boy, 20-something Remoy.
Wow. I mean, hey, you know.
I wouldn't even wrestle. I would just come and stand on stage and just be beautiful. You know what I mean?
Pretty Remoy. Kind of like that Pretty Ricky. No, that didn't work. Never mind. All right.
And for our folks listening out there, you can see more of these visuals at our website, MASKulinitypod.com. That's masculinity with a K.
So Remoy is actually in correct there. We will not be having his costume visuals on the website, but we will have more information that we shared on this episode about Beto's theater and activist work, along with additional resources.
That'll also be landing in your socials as well. Be sure to follow us at MASKulinity wherever you do your social mediaing.
Yes, please do, please do. And in a few weeks, Beto will be joining us on our Instagram live show. You already know it's Beneath the Mask on IG Live. We will also actually have a previous guest joining us in the meantime. So tune in for that.
Man, we are so pile driving a lot right now.
Are we, Remoy?
Yes, and until our next pile drive, for those who didn't know, that's you, Samantha, that's The Undertaker.
Okay, sure it is. Thanks.
Speaking of, it's your boy, Remoy George Phillip, the first.
And it's Samantha and Zessie. Thank you so much for listening.
Peace.
Ciao.
The X and the L is actually Roman numeral dates of the WrestleMania.
So what, that's like 40?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
I think, I don't know. I forgot. I'm a failure.